Hold on, I'm not ready. So how did the Shakers make it work economically?
So one of the reasons why I thought the Shakers did well economically is because they were moving around a lot and they were like consistently mobile, which I thought that actually worked really well for them because they were able to have a lot of smaller communities and from there have a hierarchy, but like be able to, I guess, it was easier to manage a bunch of smaller communities for them than like one large community. And so it built the Shakers into kind of something that was able to grow pretty quickly economically and socially.
I agree, and this concept that they had of this kind of communal wealth that they would create, it was one of these. They put it into writing by 1796, back when the sect consisted of 11 communities. And they one of the reasons, or one of the ways we were able to tell that they were so successful, is the wealth of the Shakers was often put on display, since they were known to spare no expense to achieve their precise aesthetic vision. They would work with the finest materials and build everything to last. One of the things they were especially finicky about was color and kind of rich tones, and they would often use the most expensive paint. One quote from the text from page 59 even said that each chair was built as if an angel was built to sit in it.
Yeah. So I very similar on page 63 around there, they were talking about how they found the idea scale on which to practice their like immense brand and idea of communism. And that allowed them to keep expanding, which brings upon my first point as well, and maintaining the size of different villages and creating like a harmonious society. They were able to constantly add new members without it having effect on any of the previous members because everyone kind of understood which role they played. There was no like battling for different classes or making having a job that made something better. And I also think another reason why they were very good economically, besides communism, or I shouldn't say communism, but their practices, and that was they also got really good at knowing how to like cultivate their land and like grab resources. And they caught on to that aspect of living very easily, which made them more prosperous, in my opinion.
Yep. And to add on to your point about living off the land really well, another reason they were able to be so successful is because kind of everyone in the community was they had the same skill set. So the common man would be able to build fences, tend to sheep's, build and fix up his own home, and he would be able to tend to fields. Where women would be able to teach, tend to cows, cook, and weave and garden. You wouldn't have just these specific people set for specific jobs, and that was it. Although
Yeah.
they would take people who were, exceptionally good at one spot. They would usually stick to that, but for the most part, everyone kind of did everything.
Yeah, and I liked how you brought up everyone moved around and it wasn't just men who were doing certain tasks and women doing other tasks, which was really progressive socially, especially at this time, which we can talk about later as well. But just men and women having the same tasks and having that like gender stronger roles really weren't there, which I think was another reason why their economy was able to thrive a little bit. Do you have anything else to add about that one?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay. So for the next one, we're going to talk about the government spectrum. So how did the Shaker governance evolve over time? So obviously it's like Mother Anne in the beginning. She's really like the forefront and the foundation of the whole Shaker movement and the community. And I believe that she was the one who was charismatic and was able to really like gather people in. She was very passive, like passionate about it. And she was even seen as someone who was like sent from God to like start this community. And once she passed, James Whitaker took over. And so, what I think that he really added to value into the Shaker community was he was able to more effectively put together different roles of being a Shaker. And that's because he was educated, he was able to read and write. And so, on page 46, it talks about how he lightened and formalized restrictions on acceptable Shaker conduct and initiated a decisive break from the world. So he also focused on removing sex and that idea of celibacy.
Right, and to kind of build on top of that, after he passed, when believe he was 36 years old,
Hmm.
he was succeeded by Joseph Meechin, I believe, and he's often referred to as the father of Shakerism. And one of the first great changes that he made in the community was he named a woman named Lucy Wright his co-elder. And at the time, this was essentially unheard of in the community and really in the world as a whole. Many of the men in the community were unhappy about this because even though they were initially under the ruling and teachings of Anne Lee, they felt that she was, as you said, she was divine and sent by God to guide them. But now this concept of bringing in essentially an outsider was just alien to them, and they were completely against it. But he stuck to his guns, and he would still promote prosperity within the community with her at his side. And by the end of his life, he had turned this a semi-small community into a pretty much a countrywide movement. One of his other big attributes that he brought to the table was his four section hierarchy that he brought for to in order to govern. The first of which was the head ministry, which was in I believe it was, I can't recall the name of the place where they stayed, but
The
it
was
was the
it from
town
the
where it was the town where
lead
they ruled from.
ministry? Yeah, I know. I
New
don't.
Lebanon, I believe it was. I think you're
Yeah.
right. So that was
Um.
the head of the four hierarchy. The second of which was a group of several elders who would govern over their small cluster of villages within the community. Next was the pairing of elders within one specific village. They would overlook all the families within that village. And the last one being the head of the individual families in the village. They would usually govern or kind of deal with day-to-day tasks, were groups of never more than 100 people, but usually over about 20 or so.
Yeah. What I just thought of too, when you were talking about Whitaker and having Lucy Wright be kind of his like right hand man, and there's a lot of controversy with that because she was a woman. And they, do you think it was because she was a woman that they didn't want her in, or is because she was an outsider? And which of those values that I think at that moment in time, being a Shaker, they really had to check their values and their morals. So I wanted to know kind of like what you thought about that.
That's an interesting point, actually, because that was one of the biggest things that they promoted was this kind of gender equality kind of concept, and that was one of the
Hmm.
reasons that this movement gained so much traction is because of that gender equality thing. But it was I'm fairly certain that it was the fact that she was a woman that kind of got them agitated, which really does contradict their whole
Right.
like viewpoint as a whole, because that's even with when they were crafting their towns later along or down the line of their existence, they would have these two, every building would have two doors and two staircases and two sets of walkways to kind of symbolize this equality, like this left and right, like
Hmm.
we're different but we're the same kind of
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah, exactly. And like even like we were discussing earlier, everything from I believe in the readings from that point on was very much so being good about equality between the genders. And then this was kind of the first time that I realized that it was being challenged. And so from my interpretation, I also thought it was because she was a woman that she was kind of getting this feedback, not only from an outside community with the riots and everything, but also inside of her Shaker community. Um, I thought that was like interesting. And I didn't know, I'm glad that you were able to interpret it the same way. Um, do we want to discuss anything else about the governance of the Shaker
Yeah, I
Society?
guess we could also add that
Yeah.
despite this Joseph being considered the father of Shakerism, one of the things I noted within the text is that despite all these improvements that he made to the community and like their governing system and the economic stability of the entire community, he never really had that same like charisma that On Lee originally had, like that she kind of possessed that really got the movement going in the first place. Like everyone, nobody. It's not like anybody had a problem with him, but he didn't really have that kind of
Right.
it factor that she did.
No, and I agree because I believe that she was kind of think of it as like I think of it as a company. She was like the face, like KFC, like you know what I mean, of
Right.
this community. And when she passed, I know a lot of people struggled with that. And he wasn't able to connect on a more personal level. I believe that his goals were more to expand the Shaker community. And
I think he had more of
he,
like that corporate mindset rather than like
yeah,
spiritual.
Right, yeah. So it's interesting though seeing how things change when two different rulers like kind of overtake, not rulers, but faces of
Yeah.
the communities change. Um I like how you brought that up. That was good. And for so actually you can read this one.
For the third question.
Yeah, the third one.
So, drawing on Professor Sam Weinberg's comments, should we resist doing what most people usually do when reading about Shakers or any other past groups? Generally, how hard was it for us to empathize with these folks? And me personally, I found it very difficult because just from right off the bat, just seeing, just kind of viewing how they would worship and how they would just kind of act in general. I mean, again, it's easy to fall into that superiority trap, thinking like from this modern day point of view, is like I would never do something like that, and I like today I
Right.
would stand against that. But we don't know what these people went through in their time. They could be experiencing constant turmoil and constant issues like throughout whatever they're doing, and now this charismatic leader is coming in just telling us that she was sent by God and she's here to guide us to the promised land. And if hearing something like that after experiencing nothing but negativity for which could be my entire life, I would hop right on that ship.
No, yeah, I agree for sure. I think that the way that they worshipped was definitely very weird. And I know that Professor Sam in the video is saying like, I mean, imagine you've never been in someone's shoes when they've woken up and went to the market and had to buy a human being. And so it's kind of weird to just try to put yourself in their shoes and even understand like, okay, we go to a Jesuit university, like how is their ways of worship kind of acceptable? Kind of putting our own faith and our own personalities aside, I thought was like also a little bit hard for me as
Right.
well. And to, like he said, he wanted to make sure that we stretched our imaginations and embraced ideas. And I think that it was also hard for me to embrace some of their ideas because clearly that they had a whole theme of communism going on. And it's a very taboo topic here, especially in the US, but um, across the world, we obviously raise concern for communism. And it's hard to accept that we can give the Shakers credit for having a good economy and a good society when like communism was kind of like being played out. It's like uneasing, but it's like I think it's really important that we try to put ourselves in those shoes. Wait one
Yeah.
second.
We can probably just go straight.
You can
Yeah.
go now.
So to add on to your last point about kind of the Shakers lifestyle, like I think it's so easy to kind of overlook all the good that they did for their community because people from an outside view, they'll just see these almost lunatics or cultist people that have these obscure ways of worshiping. But if you just take a little bit of a deeper look, you'll see that they've created this almost perfect society where everyone seems to be happy and everyone's kind of doing their own part, and everyone, there's no really material possessions. Everyone owns the entire wealth of the community, and really, like the biggest thing is everyone's living happily, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. Um, I think that's good. I'm not sure if it wants us to read out loud the final two paragraphs. I think it might. If you want to read those,
Yeah, pull
if
it
you
up.
have it up.
Oh, I just lost it. You pause it real quick. The Shakers' aversion to the world as they found it and their exuberant millenarian hopes combined to liberate them from any regard for the established forms of human association. Within their villages, they built an entirely new kind of society, one founded upon total equality, spiritual transcendence, and a utopian faith in the perfectibility of life and earth. We are the people who turned the world upside down, Anne Lee would like to say. Ultimately, life within Zion was less about what the Shakers did than about what they didn't do, namely, just about everything that might be called worldly. To them, the state of total abstention or abstention, what they called being simple, added up to a doctrine of radical freedom, freedom from appetite, from nature, from impulse, and perhaps most important, from the conventions of the world. By scorching out the lusty, scuffling habits of Babylon, the Shakers hoped to perfect and liberate their souls and their community. Their best known song celebrates this remarkable paradox. I will bow and be simple. I will bow and be free.
Yeah, and so what do you think that it means by living simply, and what is the paradox in the song lyric?
So simply living, I feel as if that means the total state of abstention, which includes like a doctrine of radical freedom. So I think that really their whole thing is just they don't want to be weighed down by like manly restraints, or like the restraints of like mankind, because
Mhm.
any doctor today will tell you that people need to eat, they need to be bathed, they need to be clothed, and they need from time to time sexual attention. But if they remove all these factors, then they feel that they can live in this kind of almost transcendent kind of place and just be something that is human, but maybe a little bit beyond human.
Yeah, and I think that the paradox, which you kind of talked about, well, I will bow and be simple, and I will bow and be free. I think that it's kind of contradictory to each other at some points, because I don't think that freedom is a very simple thing at all. And it's something that we've struggled with since the foundation of our country. And I think that even the Shakers struggled with a little bit. And they did ultimately strive for immense freedom in their utopia. And by living simple and living free, it can't be done simultaneously, in my opinion, to the extent that they truly did desire. And so, for example, they had women taking leadership positions like Anne Lee. Um, and so that was great to see that kind of equality. But then on the other side, they had certain rules that were kind of unsettling for some other of their members. So I think that was kind of like a paradox that they had to. That's how I kind of empathize with them as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that makes sense. And I do agree that it does seem kind of contradictory, but I think it also kind of in their own vision, I think what they're saying makes sense because in their kind of in their view, they are living free according to like their definition of being free, which means being free from, these manly chains that I've been referring to.